So welcome to CEGA's annual Evidence to Action Symposium. My name is Temina Madon, and I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Effective Global Action, or CEGA. We're a development research network headquartered here at Berkeley, and today's event is co-sponsored by the Jameel Poverty Action Lab, or JPAL, which is based at MIT, as well as the Energy Institute at Haas, and the Clausen Center for International Business and Policy, also at Haas. So thank you to all of our co-sponsors. Thank you to the audience for being here today. As you know, today's focus is climate change and economic development. And in keeping with the topic, I'm supposed to announce that the symposium today was certified by Berkeley's Office of Sustainability as a green event, which means we've taken steps to decrease our environmental impact. So thanks to the staff for coordinating that. So I'm just going to give a few brief remarks to set the tone for the day. As we all know, climate change to date and carbon emissions have been driven by industrialized nations, but at the same time, it's expected to drive food insecurity, conflict, and mass migration in some of the poorest countries. So climate change very likely will act as a barrier to global development. Fortunately, millions of people have been pulled out of poverty in the last few decades, particularly in countries like China, Mexico, and Brazil. But on the flip side, we know that rapid economic growth can cause environmental pollution and a growing demand for dirty energy. So economic development in the status quo is accelerating climate change. And that's what we want to talk about today, this nexus between global climate change and global economic development. And what you'll hear about today is a number of solutions that are being proposed by researchers across many disciplines. So as a bit of background, there are a lot of global climate models that are predicting variation in temperature and rainfall or precipitation in the decades to come as a result of climate change. Studies by CEGA affiliates like David Lobel at Stanford and others have shown that these changes will result in reduced crop yields, food insecurity, and potentially even violence. We know that wealthy farmers and households are more likely to survive or more likely to be well equipped for survival, but we don't really know how the poorest people will cope. Now, we think there are a lot of potential strategies for adaptation to climate change. Some of them are being pursued by governments and NGOs. We can subsidize improved crop varieties like drought-resistant rice to promote farmers' resilience to changing climates. And in fact, you'll hear about a study today on flood-tolerant rice from Elizabeth Sadulay, who's a Berkeley economist working in East India. We could, in principle, promote crop diversification and conservation techniques among farmers in sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia. We can also offer new kinds of crop insurance with premiums that are affordable even for the poorest farmers. But we can imagine lots of reasons that these approaches might not work. People in rural areas may be slow to adopt new farming techniques because they don't have access to information. They may be slow to adopt new technologies or new practices because they're untrustworthy, unknown. And it's expensive for governments to subsidize new technologies, whether it's fertilizer or improved seeds, because it's difficult to target the most vulnerable farmers, so you end up wasting precious resources. And in developing countries, as here in the US, it's difficult to change community norms related to resources like water. How many of you, be honest, still have inefficient or low efficiency shower heads and toilets and faucets in your house? A lot of us, right? So behavior change is really difficult. The flip side of the story, as I mentioned, is that economic growth and industrialization are driving energy consumption. We'll hear more about that today from Paul Gertler, an economist here at Berkeley. This image here, I didn't adjust the colors, that shows industrialization along the Yangtze River in China. China, as I mentioned, has achieved really rapid poverty alleviation in the last 30 years. And we all agree, I think, that bringing people out of poverty is an unquestionably good outcome for society. But we do need to learn how to mitigate the negative environmental impacts of development. And again, we can imagine a lot of potential solutions. We might audit industrial plants to enforce pollution controls in emerging markets. Today we'll hear about an example of this from MIT economist Michael Greenstone and his colleague Hardik Shah. We might offer subsidies and incentives for the purchase of cleaner technologies. And again, we'll hear today from Berkeley economist Lucas Davis and his colleague Veronica Irastorza about a kind of cash for coolers program in Mexico, not so unlike the cash for clunkers program we had a year ago as part of Obama's stimulus program. Finally, we'll hear from a computer scientist, Eric Brewer, and his colleague Catherine Wolfram, a Berkeley economist, about incentives for the use of solar microgrids by rural off-grid communities in Kenya and India. There are a lot of adaptation and mitigation strategies that we can imagine working. Maybe the one we've heard most about is trade in carbon emissions. But we can imagine barriers to every one of these strategies, reasons they wouldn't work. Last week, the European Parliament voted to weaken its own trading system for emissions, citing sluggish growth in the economy as the reason. So the question that we're exploring today is what actually works, and what are the barriers that we're facing to good policy design, good adaptation strategies, good mitigation strategies. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Marianne Bates from JPAL, which is our co-sponsor. Marianne received her master's degree in public policy here at UC Berkeley a couple of years ago, and she's now a policy manager at JPAL working on energy and environment issues.
Thank you. I'm excited to welcome you on behalf of JPAL. And one of the issues that we're looking at today is that there's been increasing interest from policymakers in the issues of today's symposium. But many of the proposed solutions to these problems, as Temina mentioned, there's little empirical evidence as to which ones work in real-world situations, which ones don't work, and why. And so what we're going to talk about today is JPAL and CEGA's approach to this, which is rigorous evaluations on the ground, field experiments, randomized evaluations, to test what works. And an important strength of this approach is that it requires close collaboration with policymakers, with practitioners, who understand the context on the ground. And we're very fortunate to have with us today two policymakers, Veronica Irastorza, former Undersecretary of Energy Planning and Transition at the Ministry of Energy in Mexico, as well as Hardik Shah, Member Secretary at the Gujarat Pollution Control Board in India, who will be sharing their perspective. A few words about JPAL and CEGA. So JPAL was founded about 10 years ago at MIT and has now grown to include 5 regional offices around the world and an international network of affiliates. CEGA is a network of networks with collaborative links in Latin America, South Asia, and East Africa. And there's great overlap. We have about a dozen of CEGA's affiliates are also JPAL affiliates. JPAL has in the past also co-sponsored evidence to action events, and we've also conducted research initiatives together. Our longest running initiative is done jointly with CEGA on ways to increase the adoption of beneficial agricultural technologies by smallholder farmers. And our approach in doing this work is to first identify the most critical gaps in our knowledge, then fund rigorous impact evaluations to answer those questions, disseminate the results, and most importantly, partner with policymakers to scale up proven and effective programs. So what we'll see this afternoon is cutting-edge research on promoting global development in a changing climate.